This is May 21, and in this day in Baptist history, we're going to be reading about Westward Ho with the Gospel. And our scripture reading is 2 Corinthians chapter 11. We'll read verses 25 through 28. Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I've been in the deep. In journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by mine own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness, beside those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. It is difficult for those of us living in the comforts of the 21st century to realize or fully appreciate the pioneering missionary efforts of our early forebears in America. Early and pioneering Baptist preachers who moved westward own a position of honor that has been ignored and forgotten by many. Such a man was Hiram Walter Reed, the first Baptist preacher to declare the gospel in New Mexico. Reed was born on July 17, 1819, in Jowett City, Connecticut. As a young man, he was educated at Oswego Academy, and while a student at Hamilton College, he was baptized into the Baptist church in his hometown of Oswego, New York. He continued his education, graduating from Madison University. Such a well-trained young man could have chosen a city pulpit in New England and enjoyed what were considered luxuries in those days. But young Mr. Reed did not choose such a course. With the completion of his education, Mr. Reed was ordained, and his first ministerial responsibility was in Whitewater, Wisconsin. There he also served as the chaplain to the Wisconsin State Senate. Desiring, however, to preach the gospel in an area of need, Reverend Reed applied to the Baptist Home Mission Society, and he and his wife were appointed to labor in California. After a tedious and trying journey toward the land of their appointment, the couple arrived in Santa Fe, New Mexico on July 12, 1849. They were weary and worn, but after resting, they planned to persevere. A picture of the tribulations of their journey to that point was set forth in a letter which Reverend Reed sent to the Home Office. He wrote, and I quote, "When we arrived in Santa Fe, I was so reduced in strength that I was scarcely able to walk. Due to the constant and excessive labor, my hands were swollen to twice their size, making it difficult for me to hold the reins to drive my team. Mrs. Reed has helped as much as her physical strength would allow." End of quote. But as is so often the case, our disappointments are God's appointments. The very day of the arrival of the Reeds in the city of Santa Fe, the military authorities and the governor called Reverend Reed in for an interview. The report of that meeting was recorded in New York City in the Home Mission magazine. The account is as follows, and I quote, "The governor received me with great cordiality and without ceremony, informed me that he had been apprised of my coming, and with much earnestness and with many arguments he solicited me to remain in Santa Fe as the chaplain of this post. I showed the governor the instructions from my board to go as a missionary to California, and stated that no ordinary circumstances could justify my changing that commission. After perusing the document, he replied that I might travel the world over, and in his opinion, I could not find a darker and more desolate place than Santa Fe. He urged me to look the city over, a field with 6,000 inhabitants, 1/10 of whom are Americans, and then to look at the 100,000 souls in New Mexico, among whom there was not a single Protestant minister. The interview was one of the most thrilling and at the same time one of the most painful of my entire career. My soul was deeply affected as he proceeded with his plea in behalf of this wicked and neglected country." End of quote. 3 days later, after assessing the situation and after much prayer, Reverend Reed consented to remain in Santa Fe. He was the first evangelical and the first Baptist minister in that part of the country. Reverend Reed was appointed the chaplain at Fort Marcy on July 16, 1849, and he served in that capacity until March 15, 1852. Immediately, Reed set out to evangelize using door-to-door visitation in an effort to reach the people in his new field with the gospel. The Reed set out to learn the Spanish language. Since Spanish is a phonetic language, the man of God was soon able to sound out the words. Thus, when calling in the homes of those who spoke only Spanish, he would read several chapters of the Spanish Bible to his hearers. Reverend Reed lived a thrilling life. He established a school in which to teach English, surveyed much of the area around Santa Fe, and visited most of the India pueblos distributing Bibles. On one occasion, he was captured by Indians and threatened with death by fire. Reed is credited with beginning the first Sunday school in New Mexico. His endurance is revealed in the account of a journey by horseback from Santa Fe to El Paso, Texas, and back, a 950-mile journey in all. It was Reverend Reed who built the first Baptist building in the state of New Mexico during his labor in Santa Fe. He also established the Albuquerque Baptist Church in Albuquerque on October 10, 1853, and became its first pastor. We would not have had the information concerning the erecting of the church building in Santa Fe had it not been for an interesting historical tidbit. On May 28, 1882, while raising an old adobe church building, which had been used by the Presbyterians for a number of years, a cornerstone was found which indicated that the building had originally been constructed and used by the Baptists. In part, the report of the event read this way, and I quote, "The cornerstone, as laid on or about the 21st day of May, 1853, was reached and unearthed. The church was erected under the auspices of the Baptist Home Mission Society of New York. Reverend H.W. Reed, the first Protestant clergyman stationed in New Mexico, assisted by Reverend Samuel Gorman, officiated at the laying of the cornerstone." End of quote. In 1855, Reverend Reed moved to Arizona and held important positions there. During the Civil War, Reed joined the Northern Army and was captured. After some time of incarceration, he was in a prisoner exchange. In later life, Reverend Reed retired in El Paso, Texas. On February 6, 1895, his life on earth was completed, and he entered his eternal home in glory. As a token of esteem, the Baptists of New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas erected a grave marker over his gravesite in the Concordia Cemetery in El Paso, and this tribute was engraved in the stone, and I quote, "Pioneer Baptist preacher, chaplain, and statesman, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas." End of quote. Though the living conditions of the world are not as austere today as they were in the 19th century, may the Lord raise up a host of young Bible-believing Baptists in our day who possess the pioneering spirit that will take the gospel to remote areas of great spiritual need. To God be the glory.